one of the campaigns that Voices for Freedom, who had quite an impact in many ways this year, I guess when we look back on 2022, 2023, but particularly this year, Voices for Freedom will be there somewhere. Not so much in the subtext, but sometimes in the foreground. In the wake of the organisation that claims a membership of 100,000 folk and claims to basically be upholding democracy, decency, and also health organisations, particularly to account for their conduct. But their latest campaign is out, and it is designed to scare the bejesus out of you, essentially to argue that New Zealand will be signing up to something called the Public Health Emergencies of International Concern Protocols, a new series of regulations that are being designed by the World Health Organization, which, according to Voices for Freedom and the campaign that they're running, will be binding on New Zealand, and that New Zealand will, quote, relinquish its autonomy to make its own public health decisions in the interests of New Zealand. They are saying that the World Health Organization is not a political party, it is an unelected global organization, and that the proposed measures to grant unprecedented power to such an organisation should be rejected outright. They have started a campaign which you will be hearing about, mostly through social media and email, I would imagine, over the next wee while, to stop New Zealand from entering those regulations or those protocols, which are currently being drafted by Sir Ashley Bloomfield, who is co-chair, as I understand, of the World Health Organisation Working Group for the amendments to this IHR, or International Health Regulations. To join us to talk about that, not so much the campaign, obviously, but what the true facts are, is Professor Michael Baker from Otago University's Public Health Department, and he joins us now. Michael, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, kia ora, Michael.
First of all, I've just explained, you would have heard the background to this. New Zealand is apparently, or Ashley Bloomfield and others are involved in creating amendments to the international health regulations. Can you just give us a little bit of background as to what they're actually up to, please?
Well, New Zealand, like every other country that's a member of the World Health Organization, has signed on to the international health regulations and preceding agreements, which have been around for decades. There's absolutely nothing new about this. The last major amendment of the IHR was in 2005, and all 193 members of the World Health Organization signed on to those. So that was actually a major advance, and now they're being revised in light of the COVID-19 experience. So there's nothing new about this at all. They've been something that has been used across the globe for decades to improve public safety across the globe. And they cover very basic things like when a ship arrives in a harbour. This is obviously, they really from the days when people travelled more by ships originally, they would have to give what's called pratique to say they didn't have infectious diseases on board that were a risk to the country that was receiving the ship. And more recently, obviously, it's shifted to air travel as the main way that infectious diseases get around the planet. And they're seen as mutually advantageous for countries across the globe, and that's why we've all signed on to them for decades.
Now, the Voices for Freedom campaign and that of many of the same anti-vax organisations that were involved in the last couple of years allege the following: that these regulations will give the World Health Organization the opportunity to order individual countries into lockdown, require travel passes, restrict travel, require mandatory vaccination, force medical examinations, share pathogens and genetic information, censor scientific debate, force member countries to support other developing countries and dictate the distribution of pandemic-related products. Are any of those 10 odd bullet points true?
No, they're not correct. I mean, countries still maintain decision-making and their own sovereignty. Of course, there's an expectation that countries will follow these principles to some degree. I mean, they're hugely overstated there. But yes, I mean, it is designed to encourage countries to share information about outbreaks if they have them, and also have common approaches to managing them at borders. But countries do not surrender their sovereignty under these agreements. Remember, this is international law we're talking about. It's not like criminal law where you can impose, governments obviously have the police and courts to impose law, and that's what we expect. We want law and order in our society. So international law, as we all know, is very different in terms of how it's actually operationalized. But certainly, we would want, if China is, for example, experiencing another pandemic emerging there, we would like to know about it quickly. I mean, everyone in the world would. And similarly, and this is pretty unlikely, a new pandemic started in New Zealand, we would, of course, want to report that globally. And that just makes common sense. I mean, it's not at all going to compromise our sovereignty.
All right. So you're saying that the claim that they can order individual countries into lockdown, the World Health Organization, from these new regulations is bollocks?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
All right.
That's a decision for any country to make themselves if they're going to impose those kind of measures.
The other thing, and you're also suggesting censor scientific debate, that would also be nonsense as well. They have no regulation to do so.
Yes, of course. I mean, how would they do it? I mean, they can't stop you broadcasting. They can't stop newspapers. I mean, that would be absurd.
Okay. All right. Now, the other thing that I'm interested in, though, is this is an ongoing. So obviously there's still that grievance in a good section of our community, Michael, as to the whole COVID response and things like that. There is a wariness amongst elements in New Zealand. I guess that's the best way to describe it, to do with the World Health Organization in particular, because they didn't exactly cover themselves with glory in the initial terms of the COVID outbreaks. Do you understand that, or do you just go, no, these people are willfully ignorant and they are running a conspiracy theory for their own personal ends?
Look, I think we need to always question international organizations and governments about how they manage these threats. And I agree with you. I think the World Health Organization didn't perform well during the pandemic. I mean, their advice was quite slow, and they didn't, for example, suggest limiting movement of infected people across borders. They were slow to adopt things like masks. If anything, they possibly did what perhaps some people from Voices for Freedom would have liked. They did very little, whereas I think New Zealand succeeded in having an incredibly low mortality rate throughout the pandemic and right up till today by doing a lot more than the World Health Organization was asking it to do. So I'm not sure of how their views would fit with that.
One of the things that struck me about the World Health Organization was the origins of the COVID virus itself, which I would have thought you'd want to know really quickly. Where did it come from? How did it get to be here and stuff like that? And the World Health Organization stuffed around on that issue so much, and they still appear to be stuffing around to me from this vantage. Michael, I don't know what your thoughts are. Is the World Health Organization influenced politically by some of its membership, particularly countries like China?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's a membership-based organization. So, yes, it is. It does rely, again, a bit like the UN, on achieving consensus. And that can be very difficult. And this is also, I guess, counter to the worries that some organizations might have about WHO throwing its weight around. It doesn't do that. It's very hard for it to do that because of its basis, the way it's constituted. So it does depend on countries, to a degree, willingly following its guidelines. So, yes, it would. I'm sure it would very much like to have had a more proactive investigation carried out in China to find the origins of this of COVID-19, and I think the Chinese government has been, perhaps less helpful than it could have been with that investigation.
That's putting it mildly, I think, Michael. But There is currently a Royal Commission on the... listen, and that's the... can I just say, no one trusts bureaucrats in the dark. You and I know that. It's New Zealanders resent things happening in the dark. The Royal Commission currently on the response to the COVID inquiry is basically in the dark. There aren't public hearings. It's happening very much away. In fact, it's happening as I talk to you now, and I can't remember the last time I saw anything public emerge from that particular area. Can I ask you, does it concern you that the inquiry isn't, a Royal Commission no less, isn't being conducted in public so that everybody can see justice being done?
Yes, I actually am not sure what their process is for getting public submissions. I think they're inviting them at the moment, but you should really speak to the Secretariat of the Royal Commission about that and perhaps get a comment from them about how they're going to engage with the public more.